The Odyssey, the story, its meaning, and the evidence behind it. For almost 3,000 years, people have told the story of a warrior struggling to return home. He faces storms, monsters, witches, gods, and the temptation to abandon his journey entirely. His name is Odysseus, and his story is told in one of the oldest and most influential works of European literature, the Odyssey. But what actually happens in the story? What does it mean? Was Odysseus a real person? And is there any historical evidence behind his extraordinary journey? The story begins after the Trojan War. For 10 years, a coalition of Greek armies has fought against the city of Troy. Odysseus, king of the small island of Ithaca, is one of the Greek leaders. He is famous not mainly for his physical strength, but for his intelligence, adaptability, and skill with words. According to later Greek traditions, it was Odysseus who devised the wooden horse that allowed the Greeks to enter Troy and finally end the war. However, the Odyssey is not primarily about the war. It is about what happens afterwards. When the poem opens, the war has been over for 10 years, but Odysseus has still not returned home. His wife, Penelope, and his son, Telemachus, do not know whether he is alive or dead. More than 100 suitors have entered Odysseus's home. They consume his food, mistreat his servants, and pressure Penelope to choose one of them as her new husband. Penelope delays them through an ingenious trick. She announces that she will choose a husband once she has finished weaving a burial cloth for Odysseus's elderly father. Every day she works on the cloth. Every night, she secretly unpicks what she has woven. For 3 years, she uses intelligence to protect her household, just as Odysseus uses intelligence to survive his journey. Meanwhile, the goddess Athena encourages Telemachus to search for news of his father. Odysseus is eventually discovered on the island of Ogygia, where the goddess Calypso has kept him for 7 years. Calypso offers him something extraordinary: immortality. If Odysseus remains with her, he may never grow old or die. Yet he refuses. He longs for Ithaca, for Penelope, and for the ordinary mortal life that belongs to him. The gods finally order Calypso to release him. Odysseus builds a raft, but Poseidon, god of the sea, sends a storm that almost kills him. He eventually reaches the land of the Phaeacians. There, he reveals his identity and tells the story of the adventures that have delayed his return. After leaving Troy, Odysseus and his men raid the land of the Cicones. Their greed prevents them from leaving quickly, and many are killed when the Cicones counterattack. Next, they reach the land of the Lotus-Eaters. Anyone who eats the lotus loses the desire to return home. Some of Odysseus's men taste it and want to remain forever. Odysseus must drag them back to the ships. The danger here is not violence, it is forgetting. The lotus represents the temptation to abandon responsibility, identity, and purpose in exchange for comfort. The travelers then arrive on the island of the Cyclopes. Odysseus and several men enter the cave of Polyphemus, a one-eyed giant and son of Poseidon. Polyphemus traps them inside and begins eating them. Odysseus develops a plan. He tells the Cyclops that his name is Nobody. He gives him strong wine, waits until he falls asleep, and then blinds him with a sharpened wooden stake. When Polyphemus cries for help and the other Cyclopes ask who is attacking him, he answers, "Nobody is killing me." Believing that no one has attacked him, they leave. Odysseus and his men escape by tying themselves underneath the Cyclops' sheep. It is a brilliant victory of intelligence over physical strength. But then Odysseus makes a serious mistake. As his ship sails away, he proudly reveals his real name. Polyphemus prays to Poseidon, asking the god to punish him. Odysseus's cleverness saves him, but his pride makes the journey home far more difficult. The travelers later meet Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Aeolus gives Odysseus a bag containing every wind that might blow his ship off course. With Ithaca almost in sight, Odysseus falls asleep. His men believe the bag contains treasure. They open it, releasing the winds and driving the ships far away from home. The crew then encounters the Laestrygonians, a race of cannibalistic giants who destroy every ship except Odysseus's own. The survivors reach the island of Circe. Circe uses magic to transform some of the men into pigs. With help from the god Hermes, Odysseus resists her magic and persuades her to restore them. Odysseus remains with Circe for a year, before his men remind him that they are supposed to be returning home. Circe tells him that he must travel to the edge of the underworld and seek advice from the dead prophet Tiresias. There, Odysseus meets the spirits of the dead. He speaks to fallen warriors and discovers that his mother has died while waiting for him to return. The journey into the world of the dead changes the meaning of his adventure. The greatest danger is no longer simply being defeated by a monster. It is losing the life, family, and identity to which he is trying to return. Odysseus next confronts the Sirens, whose beautiful song causes sailors to forget everything and steer towards their deaths. He orders his men to block their ears with wax. But Odysseus wants to hear the song. He has himself tied to the ship's mast and commands the crew not to release him, regardless of what he says. This is another example of his intelligence. He recognizes that, once tempted, he may no longer make a rational decision. He therefore limits his future freedom in order to protect himself from his future weakness. The ship must then pass between two dangers. On one side is Scylla, a six-headed monster who seizes and eats sailors. On the other is Charybdis, a terrifying whirlpool capable of swallowing the entire ship. Odysseus cannot avoid all loss. He chooses the route past Scylla, sacrificing several men rather than risking everyone. It is one of the poem's most uncomfortable moments. Leadership does not always involve choosing between good and evil. Sometimes it means choosing between two terrible outcomes. Finally, the crew reaches the island of the sun god Helios. They have been warned not to harm his sacred cattle. When Odysseus is asleep, the starving men kill and eat them. As punishment, Zeus destroys their ship. Every member of the crew dies except Odysseus. After years with Calypso and the Phaeacians, Odysseus finally reaches Ithaca. Athena disguises him as an elderly beggar so that he can discover what has happened in his absence. He does not immediately announce his identity. He watches. He tests the loyalty of his servants. He speaks with Penelope without revealing who he is. One of the most moving recognitions comes from Argos, Odysseus's old dog. Argos has waited 20 years for his master. Although Odysseus is disguised, the neglected dog recognizes him, moves his ears and wags his tail. Unable to greet Argos openly, Odysseus turns away and hides a tear. After seeing his master one final time, Argos dies. Penelope eventually announces a contest. She will marry the man who can string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through a line of axe heads. None of the suitors can even string it. The disguised Odysseus takes the bow, strings it easily, and completes the challenge. He then reveals who he is. With Telemachus and a small group of loyal servants, he kills the suitors and retakes his home. Yet Penelope does not accept him immediately. She tests him. She orders a servant to move their marriage bed. Odysseus becomes upset because he knows that the bed cannot be moved. He built it around a living olive tree rooted in the ground. Only the real Odysseus could know this secret. Penelope finally recognizes her husband, and they are reunited. So what does the story mean? At its center is the Greek idea of nostos, the return home. But returning home means more than reaching a geographical location. Odysseus must recover his place as husband, father, king, and member of a community. The journey asks whether someone can endure war, violence, temptation, and loss, and still return to the person they once were. The poem is also about identity. Odysseus constantly hides, changes, or reveals his name. He becomes nobody to escape the Cyclops. He disguises himself as a beggar in Ithaca. He tells convincing false stories. His survival depends upon his ability to adapt. But the poem also asks whether a person who adopts so many identities can still recognize his true self. Another major theme is hospitality, known in Greek as xenia. In the ancient world, travelers depended upon strangers for food, shelter, and protection. Good hosts welcome guests before demanding to know who they are. Good guests respect the household and do not abuse its generosity. The Phaeacians provide an example of good hospitality. The Cyclops violates it by eating his guests. The suitors violate it by entering Odysseus's home and consuming his wealth. Hospitality in the Odyssey is not simply good manners. It is one of the foundations of a civilized society. The story also examines the relationship between intelligence and pride. Odysseus survives because of his metis, his practical intelligence, cunning, and ability to respond creatively. Yet, his intelligence does not make him perfect. He is curious when caution would be safer. He wants recognition. He reveals his name to the Cyclops because escaping is not enough. He wants the world to know who defeated the monster. His greatest strength is repeatedly placed in danger by his pride. Modern readers also disagree about the ending. Within the values of the poem, the suitors have violated Odysseus's household and must face punishment. However, many modern readers find the scale of the violence disturbing, particularly the execution of servants accused of disloyalty. Some scholars therefore read the conclusion as the restoration of justice. Others see it as a warning that violence may continue reproducing itself, even after a war has supposedly ended. But is any of it true? There is no reliable historical evidence that Odysseus was a real king, or that he completed the journey described in the poem. There is no archaeological evidence for the Cyclops, Circe, the Sirens, Scylla, or the intervention of the Olympian gods. The locations of many adventures cannot be identified with certainty, and ancient and modern writers have proposed numerous possible routes around the Mediterranean. The poem should not be treated as a travel diary. However, it may preserve distant memories of a real historical world. The archaeological site identified as Troy is located at Hisarlik in modern Turkey. Excavations have revealed a city with several layers of occupation, including substantial Bronze Age fortifications and evidence of destruction. This confirms that Troy was a real and important city, but it does not prove that the Trojan War happened exactly as described in Greek legend. The world described in the Homeric poems contains a mixture of periods. Some elements appear to preserve memories of Mycenaean Greece during the Late Bronze Age. Other objects, customs, and political structures more closely resemble the world in which the poems took shape centuries later. The story may therefore be compared to an old building repaired by many generations. Ancient foundations remain, but later materials have been added. The poem is traditionally attributed to Homer, but we know almost nothing certain about him. Scholars have debated whether Homer was one poet, more than one poet, or a name representing a much longer tradition of performers. The work of Milman Parry and Albert Lord demonstrated that the Homeric epics contain formulaic phrases and repeated patterns suited to oral composition and performance. The poems likely developed through generations of singers before reaching the written forms known today. This helps explain repeated phrases such as rosy-fingered dawn and descriptions attached to particular characters. These expressions were not simply unnecessary repetition. They were part of a sophisticated system that enabled poets to construct and perform an enormous story in rhythm. Most scholars place the major formation of the Odyssey around the 8th or 7th century BCE, although the traditions behind it are older. The surviving text contains more than 12,000 lines and is divided into 24 books, although that division may have been imposed after the poem's composition. So, is the Odyssey history? Not in the modern sense. It cannot provide a factual record of one man's voyage, but myths can contain different kinds of truth. The poem reflects genuine fears experienced by ancient sailors: storms, shipwreck, hunger, piracy, unfamiliar peoples, and the possibility of never reaching home. It also preserves social concerns about leadership, hospitality, family, loyalty, war, and the difficult reintegration of returning soldiers. Its monsters may not be historical, but the human struggles surrounding them remain recognizable. The Cyclops represents power without law or hospitality. The Lotus-Eaters represent the temptation to forget our responsibilities. The Sirens represent desires capable of destroying us precisely because they are attractive. Scylla and Charybdis represent situations in which every available choice carries a cost. Calypso's offer of immortality asks whether endless life would be worth having if it required abandoning everything that gives a particular life meaning. Above all, the Odyssey is a story about returning. Odysseus crosses the sea, enters the world of the dead, and loses every member of his crew. Yet the final challenge is not defeating a monster. It is proving that he still belongs in his own home. The secret of the marriage bed reveals the deepest meaning of his journey. The bed is built around a rooted tree. Odysseus has wandered across the world, but his marriage, identity, and home are represented by something living that remains firmly rooted. Perhaps that is why the story has survived. Most people will never face a Cyclops or sail past the Sirens, but we all experience distraction, temptation, pride, loss, and the search for somewhere, or someone, to whom we belong. The Odyssey may not be a true story in the way a modern historical account is true, but it asks questions that remain true. What is worth returning for? What must we resist along the way? And after everything we experience, can we still find our way home?